The Willow Men. There's a local legend from where I come from. They're simply referred to as the Willow Men. There's hardly a need for any law enforcement in this town. The Willow Men take care of all of that. Every single step taken, every single word spoken, every drop of blood spilt. The Willow Men will know about it before anyone else. Believe me, anyone that's invoked the wrath of the Willow Men has gone missing without a trace. That's when I realized that what I had done, it was too late. The Willow Men, they were coming. She just wouldn't shut the hell up. No matter what I said, no matter what I would do, she was just hysterical. She kept pacing around the house screaming. She said she found this and knew I was cheating on her. She asked me who it was, and I told her she was crazy. I guess I wore out that excuse. After a while, I couldn't take her damn voice anymore. I walked into a room, and she followed me. When we got to the kitchen, I had my fill. I just reached for the knife I could find, and I jammed it into her throat. The face of anger and sorrow melted into one despair, and belief of crimson fluid rained freely over her blouse, and she dropped to her knees, scrambling around the floor. She crawled at the tile, made gurgling noises, which only served to infuriate me. I grabbed an iron skillet that had been preheating on the stove and took a swing at her head. A wet crack followed. And while I didn't need to keep going, I did. I lost count of the number of times I hit her, but I had a good deal of blood on me. What was left was her head being held together by thin particles of bone, and blood continued to rush out. I dropped the skillet to the floor with a loud clank. I wish our remorse could have followed, so I would have felt at least a bit human, but it didn't. I was just happy to be rid of her. With a grunt, I picked up her body off the floor and hoisted it onto my shoulder. Her face hung next to me, dead eyes staring at me with conviction. I could only chuckle. But as soon as I got outside, I dropped the ragged heap onto the ground, and I went to find a shovel. That's when I knew they were watching. I could hear the whispers from the woods, and in the corners of my eyes, I could see them staring intently at my every move. Whenever I would look up into the woods, I would only see the gnarled trees staring back at me. I knew they were there. It was dusk by the time she was good and buried. I was drenched in sweat, and it had made the blood stains on my clothes expand and turn orange. I looked back up into the woods and saw them peering from behind the trees. Long, gnarled faces with hollow eyes and gaunt figures. I could only see half their faces as they chose to hide behind the precious trees, but they were there, watching, whispering. "What are you staring at, bastards? You heard her. I had to do it," I yelled at them. Was I expecting a response? I don't know. They just continued to watch me from behind the trees. I spat on the ground and threw the shovel down. They would come for me under cover of darkness, and I wasn't going without a fight. I stole away into the house and prepared. I pushed couches and dressers in front of doorways. I nailed wooden boards haphazardly to cover all the windows. As the sun crept underneath the horizon, a great trepidation settled into the pit of my stomach. Was it honestly nerves? I hated to think it was such a powerful fear that I would start breaking into ice-cold sweat. I loaded up my shotgun and reached for a bottle of whiskey. I forced in a mouthful, then another, and slammed the rest of the bottle against the wall in frustration. One door I left open. It was the back door that stared out into the woods. I put a chair down in front of it and set the shotgun in my lap. They were still staring at me, the Willow Men. We stayed staring at one another for 3 days. Eventually, exhaustion began to get the best of me, and I started to nod off. I tried desperately to keep my eyes open. For a foolish second, I popped my head up with the shotgun so that it wouldn't fall. I snapped back for no reason, lifting my head high. The last thing I wanted to do was shoot myself. Had I known what was coming, I probably should have. I pushed myself to stay up for a few more hours. The day came and went, and it was the dead of night before I knew it. They persisted behind the trees. I began to rationalize that if I closed my eyes for a second, I could have enough time to open them while the Willow Men were coming at me, so I could take a few down. Smiling, I just did that. Of course, it's difficult to tell how long you were asleep. Could be a second, could be for days. I opened my eyes again and found that I was still sleeping in a chair with my shotgun in my lap. I snapped up and saw that the Willow Men were no longer behind trees. I flipped out and held the shotgun up darting around the barrel first. I took a few steps outside, tried to control my heavy breaths. I shook damn near uncontrollably, and I found it impossible to keep the gun steady. I began to calm down when I didn't see anything outside, and I began to return to my post. When I stopped dead in my tracks, I felt tears well in my eyes, and something began to push up and out of my throat. The Willow Men were peering around the doorway and the sides of my house. I froze, staring at their gnarled faces and branch-like hands. I had to do something. I pulled up the gun and fired off a round. It managed to take out part of the door frame, but it missed them altogether. I popped up the shotgun and madly grasped for a fresh shell from my pocket. I successfully reloaded and lifted the gun back up. The Willow Men continued to look at me from where they had been. I took careful aim this time and fired once more. Another shot hit the door frame, although this time it was closer to the Willow Men. I fumbled for a third round. As I did, I saw a large shadow cover me. Looking up, the Willow Men were upon me. I screamed and closed the barrel down on my thumb, effectively severing it. Immediately after that, I lost all consciousness and collapsed. When I awoke, it was cold. My vision began to return to me slowly, and I could feel that I was being dragged. My heart sank when I looked around. Darkness stretched as far as the eye could see, and I knew I was in the deepest parts of the woods. Where my thumb had once been was black and swollen, and had managed to numb up my forearm. My ankles were in severe pain, and I didn't know why. When I looked, I saw that they had clearly been snapped, and the Willow Men were dragging me by my feet. I began to scream as loudly as I can for someone, anyone. All I did was cause more willow men to appear and watch me from behind, the strangest willow trees I've ever seen. Their trunks were small and just looked like leather. The earth around was red and moist, yet I was being dragged. Was dry, rugged land. I looked around the canopy, and I wish I hadn't. Skinless corpses hung down, blood dripping freely to feed what I now know were flesh-bound trees. My screams were swallowed by the dark, and my throat gave out. The hoarse from the strain. In the silence, I heard a faint moaning. I looked around to see if there was someone else here, maybe some poor bastards who suffered my same fate. To my horror, I discovered some of the moans, the bodies hanging on the branches, were still alive. Soon, I too would have my flesh torn asunder, and be damned to hang up there and feed the hungry willow trees. There was nothing I could but accept my fate. The Willow Men had me.